Hey everyone, it's Jack and Ollie, and for our education segment today, we're going to be speaking about hip osteoarthritis. We're going to be talking about what it is, what is the best treatment for it, okay, and then showing you some ways that you can make sure exercise are tolerable for you while you're doing your strength training.
Okay, so what is hip osteoarthritis? Well, it's a condition affecting the whole joint, not just the cartilage. So it affects things like the bones that make up the joint, of course the connective tissue like the ligaments and the tendons, and even sometimes the muscles surrounding the joint. Now, we used to think that this was a wear and tear condition where the joint wore down over time. Now, we want to veer away from that definition now because we know using the joint and putting load through the joint is really important for healthy joints. So what we like to think of it more now as a failure of the joint to handle the loads of everyday life, which can lead to the symptoms of osteoarthritis.
Absolutely, and some kind of clear things we see in clients with hip osteoarthritis, okay? In terms of imaging, we should just quickly talk about that. So X-ray imaging used to be the first go-to thing when it came to knee or hip osteoarthritis. So in hip osteoarthritis, there may be a narrowing of the joint, okay, and some thinning of the joint. However, that doesn't necessarily mean there'll be pain and symptoms associated with that. So 50% of people with narrowing and moderate to severe hip osteoarthritis won't actually get symptoms, and the other 50 will. However, then if you take someone who has hip osteoarthritis, but very, very light to moderate hip osteoarthritis, those people can get very severe symptoms, okay? So the scans don't really correlate well with the experience of the client, and that's really important to remember. So we're more focused on the experience of the client, their symptoms, and their functionality, as opposed to what the scans are saying. So some things we might see in hip osteoarthritis clients is more stiffness when lying in bed, okay, and getting up in the morning. However, as the day goes on, that hip warms up, and pain in movements such as going upstairs, maybe bending over to pick things up, okay, and actually sometimes laying flat on the floor or on the bed can also be quite aggravating. Maybe even some pain during movements like squatting, okay? So let's talk a little bit more now about what treatments are available for hip osteoarthritis, but what the evidence says is the best treatment.
So there's a range of treatments used for hip osteoarthritis. Now, unfortunately, some of them are poorly backed by the evidence, whereas some of them have really good supporting evidence. So let's talk first about the ones that don't have great evidence behind them. Now, first thing is passive therapies, often given by physiotherapists, which is a little unfortunate, but these things include all those sorts of hands-on treatments like massage and mobilizations, but also things like acupuncture and dry needling. Now, these sorts of treatments might make you feel good in the short term and might make you feel a little bit freer in the joint. Unfortunately, in the long and medium term, they don't have great outcomes, especially when you compare them to the good evidence-based treatments that we've got. Now, a couple of other things that don't have great evidence, supplements, things like turmeric, even glucosamine and fish oil. At the moment, we don't think that they have great evidence supporting them. And then lastly, new treatments, things like cortisone injections, even stem cell therapy. While there might be some merit to them in the future, at the moment they don't have great evidence supporting their use.
Okay, so let's talk now about what does have some good evidence backing it up. So in 2017, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners set out some really good guidelines for the treatment of knee and hip osteoarthritis. So for hip osteoarthritis, as Ollie outlined, there were some things which didn't have good backing of the evidence, but things that did were education, weight loss, and exercise, and this is mimicked in knee osteoarthritis as well. So those are the three big things. Now, in terms of education is what you're doing right now. You're educating yourself more about what hip osteoarthritis is and how to benefit from certain treatments. Secondly is weight loss, so there's some good evidence to show that small reductions of body fat and body mass can really help with pain reduction in the hip, okay? Now, we're not weight loss specialists, so we won't talk any more about that, but that is backed by the evidence. Thirdly would be exercise, and we obviously have a strong bias towards exercise, but particularly what type of of exercise. So things like aquarobics and non-land-based exercise, where you're not really loading up the joint, can be really beneficial for making the joint feel better and exercising the muscles around it. But as Ollie said before, we need load through the joint. So the best evidence was land-based exercises. So think of anything where you're actually putting load through the joint, like walking, or in particular strength training. So let's talk a little bit about strength training for a second. We think it's a really beneficial bang for buck way to go about exercising. You've obviously got to do what you like. However, increasing the strength of the muscles, loading the joint up so that it can adapt to more stress in its life is really, really beneficial. And all the strength training does is mimic everyday movements, put more load on them, so that next time, for example, you go to squat down, if you've done the strength training, it's easier for you to squat down and up. Okay, so that's why we think strength training is really beneficial. However, just to reiterate again, we think all exercise is good and you've got to do what you enjoy. So if it's aerobic exercise, riding a bike, going for a run, those types of things which help, well then we recommend you continue to do that. However, strength training will be one of your best bangs for buck. Okay, so before we get into showing you how to work around some intolerable movements you may have during your strength training, let's quickly talk about pain you may get during exercise.
Okay, so there's a range of benefits in regards to health and performance with exercise, obviously, and that's no different for people with hip osteoarthritis. Now, if we told you not to exercise when you had hip pain, there wouldn't be much exercise being done. So we encourage all our clients with hip osteoarthritis to persist with tolerable symptoms during the exercise program, because then we know that they're getting all those really good benefits and likely improving their symptoms and function. Okay, so once again, with exercise, you're going to be doing what's tolerable for you. There might be a little bit of pain, but we know that that doesn't mean that you're causing any harm. You've just got a sensitive joint, and we need to slowly build you up to get you stronger and improve your symptoms.
Okay, so let's go through some examples of how to work around some of the intolerances you might have when exercising. Alright, so let's run through a couple of pillar exercises that we do with most of our clients here up at the studio, and how we might work around them if we are getting some hip pain due to our hip osteoarthritis. So first of all, we're going to do them, and then we're actually just going to show you two extra little bonus movements that we would encourage people to do to bolster up the hip muscles around their joint. Okay, so let's run through the squat first, mate. Do you want to run me through that?
Beautiful. Okay, so for the squat, our easiest variation is going to be a sit to stand. Okay, so just a quick recap. That's where you're sitting on a chair, for example, and just rising to a standing position. Slightly harder version is going to be just the body weight squat, like so. Okay. Now, this can be an aggravating activity for a lot of people with hip osteoarthritis, because we are asking a lot of the range of motion of our hip. Okay, so how might we modify it if someone's getting intolerable hip pain, meaning that they can't persist with the exercise? The first thing is going to be reducing the weight. So Jack hopefully is holding some resistance for his squats to really build up his musculature. Now, if that's really bothering his hip, we're going to get rid of some of that weight. Okay, might lighten the load or go to body weight, see if that relieves some of his symptoms enough so that he can perform it easily. Now, the next thing, if that doesn't work, would be to reduce the range of motion. So for the sit to stand, we're going to increase the height of the chair. So we've added a cushion here. All right, so there's less range of motion requirement for the hip. All right, and that can be enough to make it less painful during that movement. And equally with the squat, Jack's going to show you side on. Okay, so a full depth squat, okay, is all the way down, but Jack's just going to a half squat there, so not going quite as deep. Once again, reducing the range of motion requirements at the hip.
Yep, awesome.
Okay, so that's two options there. Of course, you can always play around with your stance position to make things a little more tolerable. Okay, and the other thing might be to just slow down the movement. Yep. So by doing tempos, sometimes that can be enough to make it a little more tolerable for certain people. Okay. Now, Any other tips there before we move on to our second exercise there, Jack?
No, Matt, I would say those are the main things. Once again, just playing around with the stance which is comfortable. There's no correct stance, it's just what is appropriate for you. And just keep in mind, we want you to do the exercises as long as they are tolerable.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're just trying to work around intolerances.
Okay. Cool. Now, run me through our other exercise, the pickup.
Yeah, so pickup exercise, or what we call a deadlift. Okay, so Ollie, do you want to just show them a full range of motion deadlift with a kettlebell here? Nice, so basically picking up an object from the ground. Now this loads up the hip musculature quite a lot, okay, especially on the back there, the glutes and the hamstrings, and you do have to get into quite a lot of hip flexion, okay, where your knee is coming closer to your chest. So that can be quite aggravating for people. So probably the first thing we would say once again is, if you can get down into that position, but it is maybe the weight that's intolerable for you, you can just reduce the weight once again. So these principles come up time and time again in each exercise, but we're going to actually reduce the range of motion. We find that with people with hip osteoarthritis, when they're doing this, that this can really help with their symptoms if they are getting it in this exercise. So popping it up on a little pedestal like this, okay, literally a stool here, but you could use small books so that you can go in increments, okay? And Ollie might start at a height there, so it's a really shallow lift, okay? We're not going too deep, and that may help with the symptoms. And then over time, what we would really encourage is, if you can, slowly going deeper and deeper, so putting less and less height on that stool. And once again, that's where books are really good.
Yeah, just take away one or two of the books and slowly get deeper and deeper until you can hopefully manage lifting from the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once you get to a position where the range of motion is comfortable at a deep level, then you can start to work your weight up once again. Okay, so I think those are probably two of the biggest ones. Definitely maybe playing around with your stance might help, doing a wider deadlift, okay? And once again, you don't always have to shoot your hips back too much. If we can get away with it, we might be able to have a little bit more knee bend in the deadlift, okay? Do you want to just show us quickly there, Ollie? So we're still picking things up, so rather than getting his torso over, he might keep his torso a little bit more upright.
So I'll just show the difference. So that would be a more standard pickup position with the hips right back. Okay, if that's aggravating, what you might do is push your knees forward so you're a bit more upright, a little less movement at the hip required.
Absolutely. Awesome. Hey, did you have anything else to add there around the deadlift?
No, I think that about covers it. I think once again, if you can perform both these exercises, the squat and the deadlift, in whatever way you're able to manage, they're going to have really good benefits in a range of areas for your health and your performance. So try these little tweaks and see what you can do to make them tolerable.
Okay, let's just show our viewers two little bonus exercises that they can do. Pretty standard exercises, nothing too special about them, but just really good for loading up the muscles around the hip without putting too much stress on them like that we did in those movements there. Okay, so Ollie, the first one is going to be just some simple standing hip abduction. Okay, so all Ollie's going to do is stand there. Now, he might hold on to a chair or a bench or something if he needs to, but otherwise you've probably seen this one a million times, but it's just a good exercise for loading up all the muscles on the side of your bum there, so your glute medius, minimus, and some other muscles there, okay? So all Ollie's doing is simply, while standing on his straight leg there, he's just lifting his foot out to the side, trying to keep a pretty straight leg, okay? We don't want to see that bent up too much. All we want to see is his toes both facing in the same direction. Okay, that's really important because then we start to use other hip muscles. It's not wrong or dangerous, it's just we want to work the muscles on the side there. Okay, now if you do it without a bench, it's going to be harder. Okay, so standing on that one leg means you're actually working both sides of your hip. So we would highly encourage you to be able to do that if you can tolerate it.
Really good for the balance as well, that one. A little added bonus there. Now, the next exercise we're going to run through is another commonly used exercise. It's the glute bridge. Okay, so we're going to do it on the floor today, but you can do it lying on a bed if getting down to the floor is a real struggle for you. Okay. So Jack, lie down on the floor for me and we'll run through it. Yep. Okay, so a really good exercise for challenging those glute muscles, especially the big glute max in the back of your bottom there. What Jack's going to do is pull his feet towards his bottom. Okay, he's got his knees at about 90 degrees or so. Then all he's going to do is simply lift his hips up off the floor. Beautiful. Okay, and then slowly back down. You can see he's got his arms there for a little bit of extra balance and support, and he's really thinking about squeezing his bottom muscles, getting a big contraction there. Beautiful. Okay, now to make that a bit harder, alright, we would go onto one leg. So you can see Jack's lifted his other leg up, and now we're shifting a lot more body weight onto that leg that we are working.
Yeah. And I would say, just from down here, if you can still hear me, this is a really good way to see if you're a lot weaker on one side, okay? Because you may tend to favour one side, especially if you do have some weakness in your hip. So a really good way to kind of ease that one out.
Yeah, beautiful. Now that one, the single leg glute bridge, is going to be challenging for most people, but for those of you who want an extra challenge, you can always go to an elevated glute bridge. Okay, so having your feet up on a bed or a couch or something like that can be enough to increase the range of motion and make it even more challenging. So Jack's showing you the two-legged version. He's got his hands down, once again just lifting his hips up, and as you can see, it's quite a big movement now because his feet are up in the air. Beautiful. And of course, you can go to the single leg version, but of course, you can try and go through the sequence of those exercises we've shown you first before you jump into a really challenging movement that Jack's showing off with there.
Yeah. Okay, so those two exercises you can incorporate into your program and do at home. We would say those two first ones we were talking about, the squat and the deadlift, are really, really good, bigger global exercises for loading up all the musculature around your hip and your knee. So we would highly encourage you to try to do them first and foremost and load them up as much as possible. However, these would be accessory exercises which we would also highly recommend to help strengthen the muscles around there. And sometimes we find that they can be done potentially when the others are a little bit more provocative on a given day.
Yeah, so those exercises, as a bit of a starting point, you might start with a couple of sets of higher repetitions, maybe about 15, so using lighter loads there, and then hopefully you're doing some heavier weights with those bigger exercises, your squats and your pickups.
Yeah, once again, for the squats and pickups, we want to be hitting kind of maximum 15 reps and then working slowly down as we lift heavier, getting towards that 6 to 8 repetitions and 3 lots of that, or 3 sets of that.
Lovely.
Okay. Anything to add, mate?
No, I think once again, if we just hammer that point home, if you are getting some symptoms with your exercise, especially if it's hip osteoarthritis, persist with the exercise, try these tweaks, see if you can make it manageable for yourself, because you don't want to leave any of the gains from the resistance training on the table. Absolutely. The most out of it that you can.
Yeah, and once again, I think the whole thing is starting low at something you can manage and then slowly progressing. So you do want that progression. As long as it's tolerable, we're happy for you to go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, we hope you enjoyed it, got lots of information out of it, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys again.
See you later.
See ya.